India Economic Conclave. The landmark annual Property of Times network marked its 2019 beginning with a Power-packed South edition held in the city of Bengaluru. For the first time, regional chapters will be conducted in 3 zones of the country. Themed India's Growth Engine, the South chapter saw key policy makers, thought leaders and visionaries of India Inc. ponder over critical concerns and steps to further unleash the true potential of India Inc. We begin with an invigorating chat with Niti Aayog's Bibek Debroy, followed by a tete-a-tete with someone who's considered a role model for many in biotechnology, Kiran Mazumdar.
Let me just talk about the moot point. We're not using the word doom, but we've certainly started using the word gloom. The world is slowing down. We've started shaking a lot. Higher frequency data points is indicating that the slowdown is biting the consumer. And officially, Indians have stopped using the word achhe din.
Well, I'm glad you did not use the so-called R word. And I want to quickly get that out of the way. And it is important that one should get it out of the way because one should not bandy around words loosely. Yes, there is a downturn, and this downturn has been going on for a fairly long time. It's not something that's happened in 2014. If you track quarter by quarter, it's been declining for quite some time. So the question to ask is not so much sentiments, because sentiments are transitory, but if we are looking towards 5 trillion in 2024-25, we need to think a little bit beyond what sentiments today are and what the Sensex is today, and ask ourselves what we need to do to jack up that growth rate to a higher growth rate.
If you look at the number of 5 trillion, logically looking at the current framework of global backdrop, local growth, savings, and also a combination of where the investment cycle is, if I can top up where earnings are, it looks impossible. It looks like an impossible task that India will be a $5 trillion economy by 2024 or 25.
There are 4 ways of slicing this. They are not alternative ways, they are simply 4 different ways of slicing this. The first way of slicing this is what any macroeconomist would do, which is, let's look at the 4 important components, 4 components that drive growth: consumption, government expenditure, investments, and exports, meaning net exports. And you're absolutely right that the external world environment does not look very kind. It is not as benign as it used to be when we clocked 9% real GDP growth rates for a period of time. It's not going to ease off. So the sources of growth have to come endogenously. This is one way of slicing it. The second way of slicing it is the way any microeconomist would look at it. And he or she would say, there are essentially 3 factor inputs. There is labor, there is land, there is capital, and the rest of it is productivity. And many of the government's initiatives in the area of transport in this kind of lens will show up as productivity increases. So how do we make land markets more efficient, capital markets more efficient, labor markets more efficient? The third way of slicing it is the sectoral one. What do we do about agriculture, primary products? What do we do about industry, the secondary sector, and what do we do about services? And the fourth way of slicing it, which is perhaps even more pertinent here, is to look at the states, because after all, that all India growth rate of 8 and 8.5% does not happen in Delhi, it happens at the level of the states. And depending on the year, if you take away railways and defense, 90 to 95% of India's GDP accrues in the states. So what do you need to do to jack up growth rates in different states, including southern parts of India?
I'll talk about something which in a sense has been a big puzzle and it remains a mystery. Why are companies like Air India or BSNL still being subsidized? They are far behind in terms of technology adoption. They have fat losses and taxpayer money is always reimbursing them.
Well, the minister has said very unambiguously and in clear terms that Air India is going to be privatized. Air India is, of course, a very visible aspect. But let us recognize the following. There are more than 230 central public sector enterprises. The broader agenda is not just Air India, the 230 public sector enterprises, and public sector enterprises are, by the way, not only at the union government level, they are also at the state government level. I'm focusing on the union government level ones. The most valuable asset that many of them have, and the most controversial asset that many of them have, is land. And what often people do not realize is that even if it is a central PAC, the land actually does not belong to the PAC, the land belongs to the state government and is with the union, with the central PAC on lease, often for a specific purpose. If I'm talking about all central PACs across the board, the first thing you would need is an inventory of that land. And that's one of the reasons why complete privatization takes time. Finally, we now have an inventory of that land. But I'm fairly optimistic that we will soon begin to have some genuine privatization.
Everyone's been making a case that with the exception of 3 or 4 large PSU banks, other PSU banks, they should be folding up. But easier said than done. There are unions, there are NPAs, there are mixed issues. How do you think this entire NPA problem for banks will get sorted, and do you think merging of PSU banks and especially weak banks is the only answer?
Well, one thing you have not mentioned, and that is the legislation. Because there is a legislation that also has to be changed, repealed, amended before you actually sell off the public sector banks. The public sector banks are also very heterogeneous. So I suspect what is likely to happen, and that's both a pragmatic and a rational way of looking at it, is that you will have a different answer for different public sector banks. And the rationale for some of the merger is that you might get better value when you actually begin to sell them off.
Fair point. Let's throw in the hard fact, and the hard fact is that no economy in the world post-World War has managed to grow if the company has not spent on consumption and if exports are not strong. The world around us is changing, which is that trade war is a reality, productivity levels have changed. Is India really prepared for this new normal?
I already said that the external world, the external environment does not look very bright. Exports depend on 3 things. They depend on demand factors, that does not look very bright. They depend on the exchange rate, particularly exports of goods. They depend on the exchange rate, and exchange rate depends on a whole variety of factors. And the supply side, and some of the things that the government has been doing is in the nature of improving logistics, improving customs, but the fact remains that the demand side is going to remain weak. So the sources of growth have to be internal. As I said earlier, the consumption, investment, and government expenditure. Public expenditure, because of fiscal consolidation requirements, is perforce constrained. The government has already sort of announced that there will be some rationalization of that public expenditure, so the efficiency of public expenditure will become better. Government expenditure perforce is going to be constrained. So it boils down to consumption and investments. And investments, yes, in certain sectors there is excess capacity, there is the hangover of the NPAs, which in my view, a complete cleaning up will at least take 2 or 3 years. But the simple point I want to make is that I think in 2 quarters, you will not use the word, did you use the word doom? Probably you did not. But if you use the word doom, in 2 quarters you will not use the word doom. You might still use the word gloom.
The problem is that the high frequency data, which is for autos, FMCG, all of them have reversed. What do you think needs to be done to address the sentiment and revival immediately?
The auto sector, by the way, is in not great shape anywhere in the world. That's because of changes in technology, changes in consumer preferences. I realize there are people from industry here. Whenever people from industry generally want sentiments to be reversed, what they really mean is fiscal concessions for my sector. Because other than that, you do not reverse sentiments for a particular sector. As an economist, my argument would be that what we need to do to revive sentiments is to have across-the-board reforms. And in this particular case, from the union government's point of view, the single most important reform that will reverse sentiments, in my view, is the cleaning up of direct taxes and the cleaning up of indirect taxes, which of course will have to happen through the GST Council, other than, of course, privatization and so on and so forth.
So put it very simply, I don't want to get this one wrong. Are you hinting that in this budget tax kam ho jayega?
I think people should read budget speeches carefully. And if you read budget speeches carefully, and had you read budget speeches carefully, you would have noticed that the question of tax exemptions and tax rate reductions were mentioned in a budget speech, and both were in the same sentence, not just in the same paragraph, in the same sentence. In other words, you want lower tax rates, give up exemptions. Give up the idea of reversing sentiments for specific sectors.
If I may just share a feedback which I've got, and again, this is feedback from corporates, so we got to take it with pinch of salt. They said, okay, you're taxing rich more, okay, but those rich who are essentially responsible for taking the entrepreneurial risk, they are responsible for, they may represent 1% here, less than 1%, but they are the rate change agent. Is it a good idea to tax them when in India interest rates and cost of borrowing already is very high?
There's a serious element to that, and there is what I think is a frivolous angle to that. If someone is saying interest rates in India are too high by global standards, on the flip side, wage costs in India are also lower than global standards. That's the normal law of economics and factor endowment. So that's a non-serious argument. The serious argument is, one is questioning progressivity of taxation. Now, progressivity of direct taxation is accepted everywhere in the world. The rich need to be taxed more so that the poor can be cross-subsidized, and this is best done through direct taxes, not through indirect taxes. But so far as simplification is concerned, that's a genuine argument, and as I said, that I think will follow consequent to the recommendations of the task force on direct taxes.
We started with the word Achhe Din. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. Next time when we meet at the next forum, do you think I can officially start using the word Achhe Din?
My Hindi is not very good, but I'm certain that next time it will be not just Achhe Din, but also Achhi Raat.
Yeah, that's a very solid note to close this chat on. But thank you very much. You've been very vocal, you've been very insightful, and thank you for all your lovely, wonderful insights. Thank you very much.
Kiran, thank you so much for joining us on India Economic Conclave South Chapter. We have spoken to various spokespersons from the government side, and the sense that we get from them is that actually government is willing to do, and they are taking a lot of steps. We have seen some of them, like relief in FDI and a lot of other reforms.
And the recent merger of banks, I think that's also very welcome.
But then what do you think is playing on government's mind? Are they hoping that consumption will revive on its own? Because when we refer to consumption, it's directly linked to the investment that industry will make, and then it also impacts the employment. That's a vicious circle, but unfortunately it seems that for us, it's playing out completely on the opposite side or wrong side.
Yeah, so Mihir, I really feel we have to somehow tackle this vicious cycle, break out of it and start finding out ways to create that virtuous cycle with. So I think we have to do that fast. I don't think it's about one set of measures that will do it. It has to have a multi-pronged approach. So it will take a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of bold measures, but I think there are a few low-hanging fruits for us. You need to revive sentiments, I personally feel, to begin with. So for instance, there are 3 kinds of sentiments that you need to revive. One is the consumer sentiment, okay? The other is the investor sentiment, and the third is the investment sentiment. because it's all about consumption, investment, and employment. This is what this cycle is about. How do we get that started? So consumption and consumers are very, very key to kickstarting this economy. Now, at the moment, you can see that consumer sentiments is very low because you're seeing the decline in auto, two-wheelers, white goods, FMCG, real estate, etc., etc., etc. Now, that has to be diagnosed very deeply as to what is causing it. Is it high GST of 28% in the auto sector? Is it the job losses that are happening as a result of, again, this vicious cycle of laying off people because the demand has come down? What is it? So what is it that is going to be key in getting that started? I think that's very, very key to diagnose. And for that, it requires all stakeholders to come together. There's no point in the government trying to figure it out for every one of us. Every sector has to work with government to figure out what needs to be done for their sector for revival.
But I'll ask you a straight question. Do you think government is in denial so far about the economic emergency in recognizing the real threat to sustained growth? Is there a denial?
Today you can't be in denial, right? I mean,
But are
up
they in
until
denial?
now they were, cautiously optimistic that there could be a revival. So if you look at that, then we've got to fix it right now, nip it in the bud. You cannot now afford to wait longer, is what I'm saying. That's why I called it an emergency, saying that it is about time that the government now starts acting fast, taking rapid and big measures to see what can be done. There are many measures. I've been talking about it. I've been talking about, the GST, just get rid of the 28% GST slab. Let's also make sure that we bring down the GST level to a much more, to a lower level, but then get rid of exemptions as well. I don't think we should be asking, I understand the GST Council has got demands from state governments for more and more zero-rated GST, which we should do away with. Because you need income. You need revenue from GST to back some of the social welfare schemes. And I am completely with the government when it comes to making sure that we address poverty. And we must address poverty well. I think I am absolutely supportive of a lot of the government schemes that have come up in terms of Ayushman Bharat. I mean, creating the digital fiber cables for the digital economy in rural India. I'm fully for, the Har Ghar Mein Nal and the Bijli and everything else that the government is trying to do. But all this takes a lot of, revenue generation. So instead of trying to just, tax every single revenue stream and not getting any benefit out of doing that, I think we should judiciously look at how do you get revenue from these tax streams in a way that actually helps you to, collect more tax.
Are you suggesting that we should completely do away with 28% slab? Because government's argument is that there are a lot of luxury items which are not consumed by common Indian, so everything cannot be taxed at 18% or 12%.
I don't buy that argument at all because, when you look at the amount you're collecting on high-value items from an absolute point of view, it more than makes up for reducing the GST level. Can you afford to, apply the same GST on a bicycle and an Audi car? And yes, you can, because a bicycle costs just a few thousand. An Audi car can go up to 1 crore. So the amount you collect with even an 18% GST is 18 lakhs for an Audi and a few hundreds for a bicycle. So I don't think you should be looking at it that way. I think you should look at how much consumption can happen. Moreover, remember, hotels are a classic example of where the 28% GST is affecting occupancy. And the hotel industry is a big employer because being a service industry, it employs a large number of people. That's not a good thing. And that's why I think we have to look at it very differently. And I think that's where you need the stakeholders to be involved. Governments must work with all the stakeholders to come up with the right solutions. But coming to, another debate, I mean, we are here because, we are trying to talk about the southern states. Now let's look at what's happening in South India. The 5 southern states have actually now become a $1 trillion economy. I think that's great. And we are almost contributing close to 40% of India's $2.7 trillion economy. Of course, we were hoping to be a $3 trillion economy by the end of this fiscal, but at this 5% growth rate, I don't know how close we'll get to that. But having said that, I think you could have, in my view, that 5% might have even been lower than 5% if the southern states had not buffered it. That's my view. Because I do believe that the southern states, which had 8%, a growth rate, GDP growth rate of 8%, which was higher than the 7% that the country had, I think has to some extent buffered the GDP growth rate. And I think the southern states have an opportunity to continue to grow at a much higher growth rate than the rest of the country, because I think we've done we've done a number of things right. I think focusing on the new technologies, focusing on new businesses has actually helped the southern states greatly. You know that Bengaluru, of course, has been the bastion of the IT sector.
Right.
Telangana and Andhra have done extremely well also in this respect. I think Tamil Nadu, of course, has focused both on tech and manufacturing. And I think if you look at ease of doing business, I can tell you that the southern states actually are much better in terms of addressing ease of doing business. Out of all the states, I know Telangana is the most aggressive. They have a fantastic reputation of ease of doing business, but so has Karnataka. And I think if you look at all this, the social and human metrics that we are talking about, even there, I think the southern states do better than the northern states.
Right.
Literacy, for sure, I think we have a much
Definitely.
higher literacy level than the northern states. So all in all, the social indicators combined with the GDP growth rates and the kind of new age technologies that we have nurtured and grown very robustly has actually helped us to actually get to this $1 trillion economy pretty rapidly. So I think it's no mean feat.
Right. I'll ask you last 2 questions. One, in continuation of what you were saying. Now, southern states are already at a $1 trillion economy level. What will it take to take them to $2 trillion level? Because obviously there is going to be that gravity which will play on the booming sectors like IT and biotechnology.
I think it's very robust and pragmatic policies that have got us here, and we need to make them even more pragmatic and even more robust. I think there are enormous opportunities based on the digital economy. I think the southern states can deliver on that digital economy. I think the southern states definitely can also innovate much greater than northern India, because I'll tell you why. We have 100 R&D centers of innovation, global companies, all located in this part of the country. That actually is a great boon for fostering the kind of innovation ecosystem here. We have a lot of co-shared, co-working spaces created in this part of the country, which is really generating a huge startup economy. And I think that has actually boosted what the southern states' opportunity and potential of becoming now a $2 trillion economy.
Kiran, your voice is always heard very seriously by government, so I hope they are listening. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope next time when we meet, we are in a much better place, talking about much better numbers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next week, we get you an invigorating panel discussion on the role of the Silicon Valley of India in its GDP growth.